Hi everybody. I wanted to make a little video to try to go through the argument that I presented in the lecture today just one more time, so hopefully we can all be on the same page when we meet in the seminar this week. Once again, I apologize for my mistake. I hope you'll forgive me. So today we are talking about fallibilism, and the argument had two parts. The first part was about Philip Kitcher's work. And Philip Kitcher begins by identifying a kind of dilemma in the way we talk and think about the truth in science. He says, on the one hand, it seems to be quite fashionable to say that there's no such thing as truth and that the sciences cannot achieve truth, and that really, at the end of the day, nothing true can even be said about the natural world because we're always at some kind of remove from that world. We can never experience the natural world directly. We can only experience it through our own concepts, and so we never really have access to the world as it is in itself. But on the other hand, he says, scientific realism, this view that science can sometimes know the truth about a world that is independent of our minds, and that we can know the truth even about unobservable aspects of that world. That seems to track with ordinary common sense. Because after all, we take for granted that we can point things out in the world to other people, that they can see the same things, and they can verify what we say, or correct what we say. So he says there's this kind of dilemma. It's very fashionable to think that there's no such thing as truth, but on the other hand, it seems like there are things that are true, at least in our everyday experience. So Kitcher, like I said, proposes that we take a middle way. He says, first of all, let's be pragmatists. Let's not worry about knowing the absolute truth. Let's identify what's true, or think about what's true in terms of what's successful. So if we can put our beliefs to use, practically speaking, then we have good reason to think that they're true. And he specifies what he means by successful theories later on in the argument. And he also says, well, let's be fallibilists too. Let's always be engaged in self-scrutiny, always be willing to revise our views on the basis of new information, and always being open to the world correcting what we think is true, right? We got to be open to the possibility that the world will speak back and tell us that we're wrong sometimes. And he says if we take this pragmatic and fallibilist approach, we can achieve a moderate or a modest realism. So this is the view that science sometimes tells us the truth about a world that is independent of our own minds. And it can tell us the truth about observable things and unobservable things, things like gravity that you can't see. So Kitcher moves forward. He tries to press the argument forward by considering objections, just like you guys have done in your own papers and your own work, right? And so he considers first two empiricist objections. And the first objection is this claim, history shows us that you can't infer the truth from success. Look at all these theories that were considered successful in their own day, but we now know are wrong, right? Phlogiston theory, the Aristotelian view of the solar system, of the planetary system, the humoral theory of medicine. He says, look, all these theories at the time, they took themselves to be very successful, and now it turns out that they're false. And Kitcher says, no, well, this is wrong, right? This whole line of argument doesn't think about the problem correctly. History is not a problem for our scientific beliefs, right? When I say success, what I have in mind is very specific. A successful scientific theory is a theory that provides means to hypothetical ends which are numerous, diverse, and also individually difficult to achieve. So a successful theory, right, to call a theory successful is to set the bar really high. And so the mere fact that people back in the day thought that a theory was good is not the same thing as saying that that theory was successful. Right? And so he gives some examples in the reading, which I hope you'll get a chance to go and look at. For one example he gives is from molecular biology. He says, look, contemporary molecular biology is a successful theory. It can achieve numerous, diverse, and also ends that are very difficult individually to achieve, right? Like made-to-order genetic material. So these molecular geneticists can produce rats specified to the needs of particular science who want to run experiments on them. So that's pretty difficult. And so Kitcher's point here is that the theories that were discarded were never successful in this sense of the word successful. And like I pointed out in the lecture, he also considers theories that were successful in the sense that he defines, but that also had false elements. So he considered Fresnel's wave theory of light. And he said, well, that was a successful theory, though, because the mathematics that Fresnel developed was correct. And his idea of the ether, which was incorrect, wasn't really doing any work in his theory. Okay, so that's how he deals with the historicist objection. And then he considers another objection, right? The empiricist sort of anti-realist says, look, the burden of proof lies on the realist. We don't have to prove that your methods are unreliable. You have to demonstrate that your methods are reliable. And they say the realist can't do that because realists can't say anything about unobservables. Right? So we can all see a common world through our eyes, and we can sense the world through our other various senses. But when it comes to things that aren't observed, those things are merely hypothetical. Those things are merely constructs of the mind. And we can't test them because we can only test things against those things that we can observe. And Kitcher doesn't think that this objection works either, of course. He says, we can use the Galilean strategy against this type of objection. And the Galilean strategy is to work from observable things to unobservable things. And so he gives this really great example about Galileo with his telescope back in 1610. People were saying that his telescope was untrustworthy because it was looking at things beyond the moon, and Galileo was discovering all these results showing that that part of the universe was in fact changeable when everybody had thought that it was unchangeable. And so Galileo set about basically using the telescope in the realm where things were observable. So he would look a couple miles away at a building that had letters carved in it, and he would read the letters in the telescope, and he would give it to his friend and say, now you read the letters. And they would both read the letters through the telescope, and then they would walk up close and discover, oh, the letters were in fact there, right? So they would verify it with their own natural powers of observation. And so the Galilean strategy has two elements. On the one hand, it says, look, this line between observable and unobservable is totally fuzzy, and it's arbitrary. It's arbitrary that we happen to see to the level of precision that we do. So there's no reason to distrust instruments just because they're more precise than our naturally given eyes are. And moreover, right, the most important point is that we can work from the things that we can observe to the things that we cannot observe. So that's a little bit complicated. If it's not entirely clear to you, I recommend that you go back and read that section of the text. Finally, Kitcher considers constructivist objections to his modest realism. And the constructivist objection that he considers is this claim that we never directly experience objects, but we only experience objects as they're experienced by us. And the idea is that since we only have access to our own experience, we can never know anything about the way objects really are. And Kitcher thinks, we do experience the world directly, right? So when I am standing next to someone and I reach my hand out and put my hand on their shoulder, I'm directly experiencing that person's shoulder. And to say that that's indirect in some way is to misunderstand the meaning of the word direct. So Kitcher is saying, we might not see the world as it is in itself, in the sense that we don't have an absolute perspective on the world that sees all the truths about reality all at once. We don't have this sort of view from nowhere or a God's eye view on nature. But we do have direct contact with the outside world, and this does tell us some information about it, right? So it's a modest realism. We can't know everything about the natural world, but we can know a lot of things. And moreover, it's true that we construct representations, but we don't construct the world entirely, right? Again, the world is something that we directly encounter, and the world is something that pushes back against us when we get things wrong. So the world's independent of our mind, for Kitcher.